Good morning, everyone. I am Esteban Camacho from RDC. This is the online version of a talk from the Training School 3, led by CSIC. And today I am going to speak about, we are going to understand what should be analyzed to decide if a research product should be commercialized or not. So to do so, we are going to speak about the concept of profitability, what are the market barriers, and the different strategies to compete. I hope that you like it. Well, this is the index that we will follow. First, the introduction. Later, I will speak about the concept of profitability. At the third place, we will speak about the market barriers in a sector. The fourth are different strategies to compete in a sector. And finally, the summary. Well, as you may imagine, the commercialization of a product, launching it to the market, may require time, money, and efforts. So before doing so, it is very important that we do an objective analysis about if it makes sense or not to launch this product to the market. The goal is to avoid extra costs or wasting time or money. This is very important because sometimes you have a very deep, a very good understanding of the technical part, but if you don't do an analysis of the market, you may have a distorted perception of the success that your product may have in the real world. Okay, so you need to do this analysis, and you don't have to be afraid to be wrong. If you discover that you are wrong and the product cannot be commercialized, you may save a lot of money. Okay, so today we will try to understand how to do this analysis. We will try to answer the question, should I commercialize? Well, so the analysis basically is to understand if the total profit you can do in the commercialization of a product is higher than the investment costs plus the exit costs. And what are the exit costs? The money that you need to spend to close a business, for example, because there are legal expenses or because you need to fire some employees. So this is the first thing that you need to check. And also, as I said before, the higher the potential loss of commercializing a product, the more relevant and accurate it needs to be this first analysis, because you are risking more money. Besides, you need to understand that the question is not only that you make money or that you make profit commercializing a product, but the question is what is the cost of opportunity? Can you do something better with your resources? Because if launching this product to the market, you can do certain profit, and spending the same time, money, and efforts, you can do something more interesting, then you should avoid, you should forget the commercialization of this product and focus your efforts in the other field, which is more profitable. Now we are going to speak about the concept of profitability. Profit, in the end, makes money that we can make every year with a business. And companies are for-profit organizations. This means that they search for profit. They have been created because they have a certain social goal, but in the end, what they are searching is for yearly profit. Okay, this makes a clear difference with the non-profit organizations. Okay. What defines the profit? Well, in absolute values, profit are the earnings minus the expenses. But this value, in this example, 5,000 euros, doesn't make sense if we don't compare the profit with the money we invested in the business to obtain this profit. So it is very different to obtain 5,000 euros per year if we invested 1 million euros than if we invested 10,000 euros. In the last case, the profitability of our business would be much higher. Okay, so this division, the profit divided by the investment we did in a business, is the return of the investment, and this is a percentage. So in this example, it would be 5,000 euros divided by, for example, 100,000 euros, and the return of the investment would be 5%. Okay. Curiously, the return of investment in a sector is more or less similar between the companies because they compete in a similar way. In the next slides, we will see why. As I told you before, companies are for profit. They like profit. So if there is profit in a sector, they try to enter it. If they can enter in the sector, the profit in absolute values, the profit is divided by more companies. So the return of the investment is more reduced. The profit needs to be shared between the participants, the companies that are in the sector. If there are barriers that avoid that new companies enter in a sector that already exists, these new entrants cannot enter. So the companies that are already in the sector, the few companies that are in the sector, they maintain a high profitability. For example, as you can see in the right side, you can see there the biggest oil and gas companies in the world. Probably you have a group like 10 companies that are huge and that have significant revenues and also significant profit selling. Why do they have profit? Because creating an oil and gas company requires a significant investment. And there are few companies that can do such an investment. So they are in this market because other entrants cannot enter because the investment is huge. Okay, so these 10, 15 oil and gas companies remain in the sector, they make profit and they avoid the entrance of new competitors because the investment required to exploit oil and gas wells is very high. Well, in order to understand a little bit better this concept, I will show you the picture of the right side. You can see a small street with few restaurants that are concentrated there. It seems that it's a fancy street where everyone goes to wants to go there to lunch or to dinner. Possibly the owners of the restaurants are making money, they are making profit. And why there is no other company trying to open a bar and to take part of this profit? Well, because there is a barrier to open a new bar. What is the barrier? There are not locals available. There is no space. So if I want to open my bar, I can only take it from another owner of a restaurant and they don't want to sell it to me because they are making profit. So in this case, the barrier is the space. There is no space for new entrants. Okay, imagine that we had that this street would be much longer. Then new entrants could go to this street, open new bars, and then the competition for prices would be higher, and the profitability of the sector would be lower because there are less barriers. Generally, bars are a sector with few barriers, so profitability is close to zero. In fact, in Spain, the first business idea of the average Spanish citizen, in 70% of the cases, is to open a bar because they know that the investment they require is small, approximately 3,000–4,000 euros to start, and they don't need to have a lot of skills. What happens that profitability is very low, so generally in places like, for example, my village, there are too many bars and they are opening and closing frequently because some of them go bankrupt, and you really need to make a big difference in order to remain open for years. Well, here I'm showing you different types of barriers that you may find in a sector. The higher the number and the size of barriers, the higher the profitability of the companies that are already inside the sector. You can see some of the pictures and try to think about the barriers. And to do so, what you need to think is, what should I do in order to open a business? So, for example, opening a low-cost hairdresser is not complex because you need to invest like 2,000 or 3,000 euros and to hire someone that more or less knows how to cut hair. So, is it feasible for you? Yeah, more or less, yes. So, there are few barriers and profitability is low. If you see in the central picture in the upper part, this is already a skilled, a prestigious hair dryer. Opening a business like this, become prestigious in the sector, requires a lot of effort. So in order to open a business like this man has, you really have a barrier. You have a barrier of exclusivity perceived. because the clients perceive certain exclusivity. You would need to invest a lot of time to create a brand and to create to win awards and so on. So logically, there is certain barrier. So in this sector, there is more profitability because it is difficult to enter. A company, for example, like Carrefour, they have a big volume, they are big, so they have access to lower prices when they purchase all the products that later they sell to you. They have access to lower prices because they purchase a big volume. And that's the reason why there are only few big companies, there are only few big hypermarket companies like Carrefour, Mercadona, Tesco, and so on, because they need to have a big volume in order to have access to these prices and to be competitive. They compete by price. In the end, you go to Carrefour or you go to Tesco because it is more economic in general. In the case of Apple, you have different types of barrier. The size is significant because they have access to lower purchase prices. This is already a size barrier, but there is also a prestige barrier. The exclusivity perceived by the clients makes them unique. But they have also technological barriers. They have a lot of patents that avoid that other potential competitors try to copy them. So this is the reason why they have such a high profitability in their sector, because they have different types of barriers built to avoid the entrance of new competitors in their sector. In the bottom part, you can see Lufthansa. Lufthansa, big company. What do you think is the barrier to enter in the sector? Why can't you open an airline? Because an airline is competitive when they have flights to many cities. So to do so, you need a high amount of networks and a high amount of planes. And this is very expensive. So the investment required to open an airline is very high, and that's why there are only few airlines, and they are, at least before the COVID crisis, they are profitable. In the center, in the bottom part in the center, you can see floating farms to harvest mussels. This is in Spain. What is the market barrier there? It is, in general, it is very easy to harvest mussels. You only need to put them in a row and they grow alone. But why can't I open one of these farms? Because there is a legal barrier. There are only 3,300 licenses and they are already occupied by farmers. I cannot have access to a license, or if I want to do it, I need to spend a lot of money purchasing one. So there is a legal barrier. And that's why they make a lot of money, because it is impossible that a new entrant comes into the sector. In the last picture, you can see orange trees. Here in my city, and there are a lot of orange trees. And in general, it's very easy to have access to one and to farm your own oranges and try to sell them. It is very easy. There is no a significant market barrier, and that's why oranges are very cheap, and that's why the profitability in the sector is extremely low, because there are not barriers. The quality of the orange is not perceived by the client, so the orange is paid by the same price if it has high quality or normal quality. So profitability is low because market barriers are low. A first and simple classification of the type of sectors was provided by the Boston Consulting Group in 1980, and they are divided in four: stalemate, volume, specialized, and fragmented. They are one or another type depending on the number of different approaches to achieve a competitive advantage. So, can I compete in different ways? Yes or no? Depending on this, we are in the upper part or in the bottom part. And the other is the x-axis. What is the potential size of the competitive advantage? So, if I have the competitive advantage to compete in the sector, is it very relevant to compete, or it is not very relevant? So depending on these two factors, we are in one or the other corner of the figure, and this is what we are going to see in the next example. In this example, we are going to start speaking about the bottom part left side, the stalemate sector. And the example is the one that we used before, the orange trees. When you sell oranges, there are very few ways to achieve a competitive advantage, because in the end, you are able to sell them if you reach the minimum price. Okay, so the selling criteria is the price. Quality is not, in general, is not appreciated in the market. So we are in the bottom part. And now the question is it possible that one of the competitors sells at much lower prices? No, it is not possible, because when you increase the number of fields that you have, there are very few the advantages that you get in volume. So you cannot reduce the selling price when you multiply the area that you occupy. So even if the farmer is farming much larger surface, it is not feasible to reduce the prices a lot. It is not feasible to compete better. So we are in the left side, so it's a stalemate sector, and as there are not significant barriers, the sector has a low profitability. Now we go to the left side, the upper part. Well, there are different approaches to achieve competitive advantage. And as an example, I will put a specific, an international food restaurant in this, or a specific restaurant. For example, this is a Vegan Delights, is the name that we used here. The owner of the restaurant, he decided to choose Vegan Delights because he likes vegan food or whatever. But a new entrant possibly will not compete with vegan food. Maybe he will compete with Indian food, or with Chinese food, or with meat, a specialty in meat, for example. There are different ways to achieve certain competitive advantage, and that is what means a fragmented sector. Why we are in the left side and not in the right side? Because even if Aloha makes it very good, it is difficult that all the potential clients goes to them, because the strength of the prestige is not as strong to move all the clients. So in the end, why do you go to a restaurant? Well, generally because you like it, and because it is close to your house or close to the area where you are going out. But it is not the prestige that you build is not so strong to be considered a large competitive advantage. That's why the profitability is a little bit higher than in the stalemate sector, but it's not huge. Now we are going to the right side. Okay, right side, bottom part. The potential size of the competitive advantage is significant. Okay, for example, Lufthansa or the PSA group, which is a group of different car brands that are together. Why these brands become very big? Because the competitive advantage relevant in their sector is to have access to lower costs, or simply because you have when you grow in volume, you have access to more clients, or you can divide the fixed costs of the investment. So there is only a significant potential competitive advantage, which is have lower costs, and that's why they became very big. If we go to the upper part, the specialized sector is a sector where the potential size of the competitive advantage is also significant. Generally, it is technology or prestige. In this case, I used as example Lamborghini. They have built a lot of prestige around certain car brand, but you could have also there the pharmaceutical companies, which they are very specialized because the size of a specific competitive advantage is significant. But also they have different approaches to achieve a competitive advantage. In the case of Lamborghini, they choose the sports cars, and they are competing particularly in this way. But possibly you have also the mountain cars, or the van. You have different types, different ways to compete. Even inside the sportive cars, you have also the electric sportive cars. You have the sportive cars with different kind of wheels. You have ways to compete that are very different, so you can specialize and try to compete less with your competitors because they are selling to another clients than you. This is the advantage of being specialized. The size of of your sector is smaller, you are in a niche market, but you are also competing with less people. The competitors, the competitiveness is less harsh. This one is a little bit different matrix, which I like more because it is easier to understand it. It is called the Gustavo Mata matrix. And in the vertical axis, you can find the expertise barriers. So in the vertical is the differentiation and exclusivity. This means when you are upper if your company has a lot of prestige or they have a technological advantage. In the x-axis, you have the volume barriers. So if you are more in the right side, is because when your company becomes bigger, you have much more competitive advantages. So this is to have access to lower costs. For example, WhatsApp, when it became big, it has a competitive advantage because as everyone uses WhatsApp, no one wants to use another application. So size is providing you a competitive barrier. Or in Lufthansa, as we said before, the bigger you are, the more difficult is that another one competes with you because you already have all the airline connections. Here, as you can imagine, this is not a very objective decision to put a company in an area or in another area. It is a little bit more subjective. You may have certain opinion and I can have another because everything is a point of view. Okay. In order to allocate a company in certain area, you need to do certain analysis of the sector. You need to understand a little bit the sector. Otherwise, if you don't understand how the companies compete, it is very difficult to allocate them in certain area. If you want also, you can think about your own companies and try to place them in certain region of the plot. In the next slide, I will show where I would allocate the 4 companies that you have in the left side. Well, here I have located where I think that these 4 companies are located. We can start with Cesma Ingenieros. It's an engineering company very specialized in calculation, where the size, so the x-axis, is not relevant to have access to much lower costs. Okay, they need to have certain number of projects in order to apply to the tenders, but their main competitive advantage is their capacity to calculate and to do engineering. So this technological barrier makes them to be up in the plot. They are a specialized company. In the case of Hugo Boss, you can see the brand there. They have certain exclusivity perceived because they sell their products not by price, but by exclusivity. That's why they are in the upper part, but at the same time, and there are certain volume barriers because they need to have certain size to have access to lower cost and be able to compete at reasonable prices, because in the end they also compete partially by price. So they are a specialized sector with certain volume factors at the same time. In the case of Acciona, well, Acciona has a little bit of prestige associated to the brand, and maybe this helps a little bit, this technological point of view of the company, but in general they compete by volume. Why? Because these kind of big construction companies, they apply to tenders. And how do you earn a tender? With a previous experience. And the bigger you are, the bigger experience you have. So be big is a way to have access to big tenders, and that's why if they are big, if they have certain volume, they can compete in their sector. In the case of MasterCard, it is only a volume sector. Okay, there is not particularly any prestige associated, because in the end all the markets, they offer MasterCard because everyone has MasterCard in their pockets, MasterCard or Visa. If you are not huge, if you are not very big, no one uses MasterCard because they know that the markets do not offer to pay with MasterCard. So be big is the only main core to compete, and that's why they are in this part of the sector. Here I offer you 7 different companies. Maybe you don't know all of them. Mercadona is like Carrefour, but in our country, in Spain. Novartis is a pharma company, in case that you don't know what it is, and well, I think you know all the others. I challenge you to try to place them in the figure to tell if it's A, B, C, D, E, or F. Okay. Don't worry, because possibly you place them in some place and I place them in a different way, simply because we have a different understanding of the sector. They should not be very different, but possibly your point of view of IKEA is a little bit different than mine, or maybe in your country IKEA competes a little bit different than in our country, in my country. This is also possible. Okay, so you can play a little bit to check them, to place them in the figure, and in the next slide, slide 14, I will show where I suggest that these companies are. Possibly I am wrong, and we could discuss about it. These are the places where I allocated the companies. You can also try to think companies that could be in the fragmented part or in the stalemate part. For example, the hair dryers, a bakery from the agro sector. There are many companies or many type of business that are in these parts, but it's more difficult that you know the names, because if you know the name of a company, it's because it has made profit, and normally if it has made profit, it was in the A, B, C, D part and not so much in the E, F. But for the E, F, you can think sectors that are in this part. And now I would like to launch you the question, where would you place the companies Coca-Cola and Pepsi? And logically, they should be in the same region because they are pure competitors, so they are in the same sector. You can think now, and in the next slide, I will suggest you where they are, at least from my point of view. So what you need to think is that Coca-Cola or Pepsi is something that we purchase and we pay for and we drink, but in the end, what they need is that the bars or restaurants, they want to have Coca-Cola or Pepsi to offer it. And to do so, what they need to do is to control the distribution channel. A restaurant or a bar would not purchase Coca-Cola if the truck brings only Coca-Cola. The bar is interested in having different drinks, all the drinks that they offer, or many of the drinks in the same truck. That's why Coca-Cola offers with the product itself. Coca-Cola company is offering many other drinks that can be sent by truck to the distributor, or to the bar, or to the restaurant. And Pepsi Cola is doing the same. This means that the goal is to be big in the variety of products that they offer. So the goal is to be concentrated. That's my opinion. I think that Coca-Cola or Pepsi are at this sector. You can also suggest where do you think they are and explain why. In this slide, I am showing different sectors which are similar to the sectors where you are working for. Possibly you are in the self-healing consultancy or the self-healing technology. You have worked with aggregates, with cement, with precast products. I offer you to allocate them in different parts of this plot, and in the next slide I will show you where I think they are. And this is the draw that I have made. To my view, the self-healing consultancy and self-healing technologies, they have certain technological advantages. That's why they are more or less in the upper part. And up to the moment, I don't think that there are volume barriers. I don't think that if the sector scales up, they would reduce its prices so much. This is something that happens in the cement sector, because in the end, cement is sold mainly by price, because the typology of cement needs simply to fulfill the norm. As long as they fulfill the norm, it needs to be economic. This is the only criteria. So the bigger the cement company is, the lower the prices are, because in the end there is a significant investment to dilute the prices if you sell a significant volume. In the case of the aggregates, the investment to extract aggregates is not as high, and that's why it's in a region more close to the stalemate sector. The profit of the aggregate sector is significantly lower than in the case of the cement companies. Well, we already commented that the potential profit in a sector is related with the number and the size of the barriers. The higher the number of barriers, or the larger the barriers, the higher is the potential profit. However, this doesn't mean that there is always profit, because this is related with the life cycle stage of the sector. The life cycle stage means how mature is a technology or a product in the sector. As you can see in this figure, normally a product has an initial, when it is launched to the market, it is in the research and development or the embryonic stage. Later there is an introduction of this product in the market, a growth, which means that the demand of this market increases a lot, the maturity, and the decline. The decline means that the demand decreases significantly. So an example, you know a lot how is in this moment the technology of the cars. So we could compare these stages of the life cycle of a product with different types of cars that are currently in the market. For example, the hydrogen cars, which are still in the R&D stage, the electric cars, which have more or less the technology is being introduced in the market. It is not yet growing significantly. The hybrid cars, which are in the growth stage, already reaching the maturity stage. The petrol cars and the diesel cars, which are in the declination stage. What does it mean? That, well, you know that there are many companies producing diesel cars, but possibly even if they are big, even if there are barriers to enter in this sector, the demand has decreased a lot, and they have already invested a lot of money in fixed investments in industry, so the profit is low or even negative. However, these companies do not close because the exit costs sometimes are higher. In these kind of situations, in the declination stage, it is typical that one or two companies in the sector, the biggest in the sector, are making money, they are making positive profit, and all the others are making a negative profit. Okay, so before deciding if a sector is profitable, you need to think, you need to understand in which stage of the life cycle this product is. It is very different to be in the growth stage, where many companies can be making money because there is a significant demand and not yet a lot of offer, so they can increase prices, than being in the decline part, where everyone is trying to reduce the selling prices to get the small amount of demand of clients that there are in the market. Well, how can we have access to the profit in a sector? Jumping the barriers, so acquiring the competitive advantages that let us be one of these few companies that is in a sector making money, making profit. This means to have a profitable business. Why is it profitable? Because we can do this business model that let us make money, and other new entrants may be attracted by this profit, but they cannot, because they don't have these competitive advantages. This is to have a profitable business. But the goal, what is really difficult, is to have a profitable and sustainable business. When I mean sustainable, I mean that the profit is continuous in the time. For example, I'm adding here an example of for example, an Indian restaurant. Imagine that an Indian restaurant opens in my village, and my village has 10,000 people. I guess it would be profitable for 2 or 3 or 4 months, because the people from my village would be curious about trying this kind of food. It may have certain interest, certain exclusivity perceived by the citizens, in the first months. But later, there are only two options. Or this Indian restaurant is really good, has an excellent cuisine and is somehow the best Indian between the Indian restaurants, or it would be very difficult that people from other cities and people from other villages comes to this Indian restaurant. And this is the concept of sustainability of a business. They need to have such a high exclusivity perceived to be sustainable that they need to think about it. They need to have it in their plans. And this is what is really difficult. It is not complex that a restaurant or a business opens for 2, 3, 4 months and it makes money, it makes profit for this time. What is really complex is that they do it along the time. And an example of this are the pharma companies. As you can see here, the example is Roche, the pharma company, the French pharma company Roche, because they invest a lot of money in R&D, in research, and when they have certain finding, they patent it, and the patents in the sector lasts for 20 years. This means that they have invested time to assure that they will be able to exploit certain product for 20 years. They are protected, so no other competitor can produce a similar medicine or drug. So you need to think in your own business about the sustainability, about for how long time you can validate this business model and it could work. It is not enough to have 1 or 2 clients if you know that the service you will provide or the product you will sell will be very singular, if you don't think about the continuity of how you will acquire clients and how you will assure that your clients are loyal to you. Well, the sector of self-healing technologies and self-healing products, as you may imagine, is a sector very specialized. So in general, in the figure that I shown you before, you are in the upper part, left side upper part. Why? Because the sector does not have significant volume barriers, and there you compete by technology or by exclusivity. Well, normally these barriers, in order to compete and make profit, you need to build them if you can before the market deployment. If you don't have these barriers before the market deployment, you will not be able to compete, or even someone may steal or take your technology and copy you. Okay, so in the case of the technology, it's relevant that you know how you will hide with non-disclosure agreements. You will hide your technology, or how you will patent your product and where and why. Normally, in volume sectors, this is not necessary, because in a volume sector, only with your size, you can sometimes already defend your barriers. So it is not logic to spend money also in patents if someone is already protecting the sector with the size. Well, so in order to make your business sustainable, you need first to think about the market size. If the market size is too small, you need to focus in creating a market demand and not only in defending your strategies. So you need to think realistically about the market size, and you need for sure to think about acquiring prestige and exclusivity perceived with the time, to get your own patents or to have your non-disclosure agreements and to defend them, and to acquire progressively know-how. Your clients need to know that you know a lot, that you know more than the others, because this is really a barrier, of a knowledge barrier, that will let yourself defend the profit that you are having in certain business, defend it with the time, so having a profitable and sustainable business. Well, as you have seen, the idea of creating and defending your competitive advantages, so creating market barriers, is very relevant to make profit. Okay, so in the science of a strategy, different tools have developed with the time to try to understand what strategy a company should follow in order to make profit in the future. And this relates generally to ideas. One is the attractiveness of certain industry, which is the vertical axis. The attractiveness of the sector, where we are thinking, what should we do? What strategy should we follow? And in the x-axis, we need to evaluate, we need to consider the competitive strengths that our company has in this sector. So how strong are the barriers that we have to protect our profit? Somehow this could be compared with, for example, if someone offered to you a prize or an award to participate in a contest, you would wonder if you should participate in the contest or not, depending on two factors. How big is the award, and this is the vertical axis here, and how good you are in this sector, how much are the possibilities to win this award, and this is the X sector in this figure, okay? So normally, if the sector, if the industry is very attractive, you are more prone, your company is more prone to invest money in the sector to protect the position, to build or to build selectively, as it is written there. But it depends also on the competitive strengths your company has in this sector. However, if the sector is not very attractive, only if you have a very good position to compete, you should at least protect your position or try to defend your positions instead of leaving. As you see there, the attractiveness of the industry is considered by up to 10 factors, 10 different factors. And the most relevant, as you see there, are the number 1 to 4, which means to have high barriers for the penetration of new competitors, high barriers for exclusivity reasons, the market size, as we already commented before, and to be in an early stage of the life cycle. So imagine up to 80 points from 120 are associated to the size of the barriers that the sector has. So the higher the number of barriers, the lower, the less possibilities to have competitors. The market size, because if it is big, it is much easier to meet clients and to make profit and to compete less with your competitors, and to be in the early stage of the life cycle. Why? Because when you are in this stage, the number of clients is increasing and it is much easier to penetrate in the market, even if you are not the best in the market, even if you are not in the top of the wave, if among the best competitors, you can make money because there is no offer enough to supply the demand. Well, these two ideas, in the x-axis, the competitive strengths of my company in certain business unit that we are analyzing, and the industry attractiveness in the vertical axis that we showed before, are the two concepts that are used in the classical strategy to do a SWOT analysis. You know what is a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What this analysis tries to do is to understand how strong is our company, are the competitive advantages of our company compared with other companies in the same sectors, and this shows us our strengths and our weaknesses if we have a competitive advantage or certain weakness, and how the environment is going to be in the future. So how the industry attractiveness is going to change in the future. And the goal, having these two ideas in mind, is to understand what offensive, reactive, defensive, or adaptive strategies we should adapt to try to maximize our profit, which may not be high. Maybe there are many threats in the sectors and we are weak, but we need to adapt to try to maximize the profit or to lose the less money as possible. Consider that this analysis assumes that the opportunities and threats that will come will be real. So we can nowadays to check and to think what opportunities we will have and what threats we will have. So it assumes that we are able to predict the future. And it also assumes that we cannot change the sector value chain. What is the value chain? are the different steps of a business model in a sector. So the production steps, the commercialization, service, every different sector has a different value chain, and to obtain the strengths and the weaknesses of our company compared to others, we need to check in these different parts of the value chain where are we much better than others or much worse than others. So in the SWOT analysis, we assume that in the future we will not change this. So if we are good in doing certain work or certain part of the value chain, we will still be good in the future. If we are bad here, we will still be bad. What we need to understand is how we can cover and avoid our bad side, our bad performance, to use to make profit with an opportunity or to avoid certain threat. But in general, the classical sector, what assumes is that the future is predictable and that we cannot change the performance that we have compared to other companies in the sector. And this is the key, because strategies generally use this classical analysis, and currently we know that future is not predictable and our company can change or can compete differently, as you will see in the next slides. Well, around 20 or 30 years ago, the most typical and the most used strategy was the classical strategy. As I just told you, many other strategic theories have developed in the last years. I think that there are several similarities between the development of the strategic theories and also the personal development theories, and I will explain you why. I think that 30 years ago, most of the people and even the scientists, they thought that our lives are predetermined by the environment. That after 7 or 8 years old, most of the people does not change basically their attitude and their brain, and our number of neurons stops growing after the youth. This is something that was, well, maybe you don't know this because you are young, but if you ask to your parents, this was quite generally accepted. In fact, I studied in my school that the number of neurons does not grow after the teenager age. And currently, we know that this is not like that. We know that you can grow new brain cells. We understand the concept of neuroplasticity, which means that if you use certain attitude, your neurons migrate from one region to other region of the brain, and basically that there are no barriers for the personal development. Okay, so there are possibilities for everyone, and something very similar happens in a strategy. You don't need to be strong. We know now that you don't need to be strong to have a chance to compete. You can start competing and become strong during your competition, or think about a strategy that lets you compete differently to be able to survive being small. And we also know nowadays that you don't need high attractiveness in a sector to start making profit. You may develop a sector which becomes attractive even if it does not exist yet. It is exactly the same as in the personal development. You don't need to have certain capacity to start developing it and becoming good in it. For example, as an example, I will tell you, now it is known that after only 5 days doing 30 minutes of meditation, your brain, it is proved that your brain already starts to change. So if you start, for example, working in certain business model, only your work developing this business model will help you to acquire strengths and will help you to create a market that before you couldn't see. So in the classical strategy, your strengths were your capacities compared with the competitors that you have in the sector that you were evaluating. Currently, when we think about the strengths or the weaknesses, we think much more in your own strengths, not necessarily compared to your competitors and in certain value chain of a sector. Why? Because we understand that a company can deploy a new business, a new way to compete, a new business model that can beat the current or the traditional business model of the sector that we are evaluating. Summarizing, in strategy, it is exactly as in life. If you compare too much, like the classical strategy does, you always lose. Okay, you need to think wider than this. Basically, you need to know yourselves, your skills, and also your weaknesses, and you need to focus in developing your potential. And you need to understand that your best skill, even if it's not a very good skill, is your strength, and you need to feed it to make it unique. I think it's a nice example to compare this with the deaf-blind people. Deaf-blind people is people with difficulties to see and difficulties to listen, to hear, or they cannot even see or hear anything. But you have two different kind of deaf-blind people. People that was congenital deafness, so they never heard before, and they lose progressively their capacity to see. These people communicates with signs because they were able to see when they were young, so they learned the signs language. And you have other type of deaf-blind people with that is blind congenitally, they never saw before, and later they became deaf. These people was never able to see the sign languages, so they are using the alphabetical language in hand. Apparently they are similar, but they have a very different way to communicate with the people that they have around. So depending on their capacities, for them their skills are that one of them was able to see when they were young and the other were able to hear when they were young. These are their skills. Depending on the skills they had, they adapted to the world, and they were able to compete here. Okay, they had no other option than adapt, because they needed to adapt to survive, and that's how they develop their strengths. And they have incredible capacities because they have been forced to use certain skills that we did not use before. For example, they have a very powerful capacity to smell, and also a very sensitive tact sense, because they needed to develop it to be able to communicate with the world. So I don't have, and possibly you don't have these capacities, simply because our brain works like, if you don't use it, you lose it. So in their case, they are using it a lot, so they have developed a lot this skill. And this happens the same in the business. If you use a lot certain capacity that you have, if you try to penetrate certain strength to make it larger, then it will become really a competitive advantage. You will build a competitive advantage that will let you compete in a market progressively with the time. So how can we classify the current trends of strategy besides of the classical? You can see the classical there in the bottom part left side. Well, we can divide it in four: the classical, the adaptative, the shaping, and the visionary strategy. And what it means is that generally, when certain conditions take place in a sector, generally the predictability of the sector and the malleability of the sector, it is more logic to take an adaptative, a shaping, a classical, or a visionary strategy. Well, when a sector is predictable, this means we can more or less to foresee the future, but we cannot change it. Our entry in the sector cannot change the sector. We take the classical strategy. The classical strategy means, well, things are like they are, and I cannot do anything. So I will follow the classical strategy. I will do the SWOT analysis. I will understand what is my position considering the current picture, and I will think what I will do for myself, because I cannot change the sector itself. Well, when we cannot predict what is going to happen and we cannot change it, what we can do is simply to adapt, to try to promote, to adapt easily with our strategy. Okay, for example, reducing fixed costs and trying to have departments in the company that are able to change fast. Why? Because we don't know what is going to happen in the future, so we cannot build something for sure. Well, let's continue there in the upper part. Unpredictability, height. Okay, we cannot predict the future, but we can change it. Okay, we don't know how the market will be in the future, but we are in an embryonic stage, in the research and development stage of the sector, which means that our entry in the sector can change it, because there are few competitors, possibly only us, or it is us and 2 or 3 more. So together we can give a shape. For example, we can change the norms in the sector. This means a shaping sector. You may start telling to the potential clients what are the capacities of the product, why the product is useful, and also speaking with the potential clients, you can try to understand how to compete in the future. So it's somehow a cooperation between you and the potential clients, because you don't understand yet very good how the demand will be. And finally, we are in the bottom part, right side. When the sector is predictable, so we can imagine what is going to happen in the future, but we can also change it, because somehow we can propose a very disruptive way to compete, because we have certain innovation or certain disruptive idea that can change the business model, so we can modify all the sector with our attitude. This is a visionary strategy. What means visionary? It means that if I really believe that I will change the sector, because I can predict what is going to happen, and I know that I can change it, I simply walk on that way, and I don't stop until I do it. Okay, I don't change my strategy. I am convinced that things will change, because I will change the sector with my entry. For example, a clear example of this is the entry, for example, of Amazon in the market. No, they understood, they thought, if we do this and that, we are really going to change the sector and change the demand and become market leaders. No, you have many visionary companies which have been pushing in certain direction until they conquered and became clearly leaders of the market. And well, the previous product or way to compete is in the decline stage, because the new proposal is much more efficient or has lower costs. So each of these 4 type of strategies has a different optimum procedure, no, that someone needs to follow in order to apply it good. For example, in the case of the classical, as you know, the best is to analyze the current picture, to plan, because we can plan what will be our strategy to compete in a sector that is certain and that we can predict, and later to execute. An example of a company that is in a very classical sector is, for example, Procter & Gamble. You know that they produce soaps, foams, and toothpaste, and, well, products that are very classical and which are not expected to change significantly the way to compete in the market. Normally in the classical strategy, a company, when the most recommended is to follow a classical strategy, the company should be big. Okay, it's more typical for big companies. In the case of the adaptative, well, the company needs to be able to vary, to modify, to change the strategy easily, to select what of these strategies work, and to be able to scale up this option that was proved to be successful, and to be able to vary again. Okay, what do I mean with vary? For example, the company Zara. Zara applied a strategy to try to adapt the clothes to the trend of each season. Why? Because in the past, before Zara, the clothes were manufactured in China, and to manufacture the clothes in China, you need a couple of months between the design and to have the final clothes in your country. With 2 months, you cannot react to the trend, to the fashion trends. So what they did is to apply a logistic where all between the design and have the clothes already in their shops, you have no more than 2 or 3 weeks. How they do it? Well, manufacturing, for example, in Morocco or Tunisia, which are much closer than China, and trying to promote this connection between the designer and the factory. The advantage there is that, okay, maybe they can, in the beginning of the season, launch 20 different designs of clothes, and after 2 or 3 weeks, they know what are the trends. They know that this or that design are successful and they can scale up. This is what I mean with vary, select, and scale up. Okay. In the adaptative, as you understand, the key is to be fast, to adapt faster than the others, to make more profit than the others, because you reach earlier the optimum way to make the business. Now we go to the visionary. Okay, in the visionary, the first is to envisage, so to prevent what is going to happen, to build and to persist. If you are convinced that certain business model will be successful, and that you can rule this change, what you need to do is to try to build it and to be persistent, to insist on that, trying to be the first, because if someone is a visionary before you, they may have access to more clients before than you and to scale up before than you. So it is key to be the first. In the case, I can provide you here an example. Airbnb is somehow is the largest hotel operator in the world, and they don't have hotels because they understood that the key is to be the company between the client and the owner, but they are simply in the middle. They thought that this makes sense, and they are competing in this way, and they are market leaders. And finally, in the case of shaping, the key, as we don't know what can happen in the future, but we can change it, the key is to engage potential client, potential users, to try to orchestrate. This means to try to create a potential market and understand together with the client what could work, and to evolve in order to adapt the sector to compete good there, because I can shape the sector. So I need to adapt it to be one of the references in the sector. In the case of the shipping strategy, the key is to be the orchestrator of all this development or all this growth of the sector, which is yet in embryonic stage. Well, it is interesting to try to allocate these 4 theories of strategy in the different parts of the life cycle of a company. It is not necessarily as it is shown in the figure, but it is true that generally the shape when a shaping strategy is recommended is in the initial part of a sector, in the research and development part. Why? Simply because if we don't know yet how the sector will evolve, means because we are in the initial stage, in the embryonic stage. Normally, the adaptative strategy should be following the introduction or growth stage, because there is still a high rate of unpredictability, and this normally happens with a sector that we don't know yet very good, but we cannot change it very much because the sector already has certain size, and this means that it is too big to be changed by us. Later follows in the maturity stage the classical strategy. Okay, it is predictable already, and we cannot change it because the companies that they are in it are too strong. They are big, and competing with them is complex. And even if we compete, it is difficult that we that we beat them because they are making a lot of profit and they are able to compete very well. However, if we go to the decline part, normally companies that are in the decline part because the product is already in the last part of the life cycle, in this stage, the visionary strategy makes sense. Why? Because there is a company that thinks, okay, things are not working. We are not making profit. The product is already in the last part of the life cycle stage. The clients do not want anymore this product. What should we do? And then a visionary company rises and they think, okay, we need to change totally. We need to change the things. And they predict what is really demanded by the clients, and we work to make a change and to start the new life cycle of the next generation of a product. Okay, this is normally where are these 4 types of strategy located in the life cycle stage of a product. Now I would like to ask you, where do you think, what kind of a strategy do you think you should apply in your sector, in the sector where you are working, your self-healing product, your self-healing technology? So you can think a little bit about it, and I will suggest you where I do think that they are in the next slide. Well, one of the ways to try to understand where your sector pertains to is to wonder, can I do a SWOT analysis? Is it easy to me? Is it logic to me to do a SWOT analysis? And as you can see in this plot, normally in the upper part, where you cannot predict the sector, it is very difficult to identify opportunities and threats because you cannot even foresee what is going to be demanded in the sector. And in the right part of the figure, you will see that when a sector is highly malleable, normally there are not, it's difficult to identify strengths or weaknesses to compare because people can compete in very different ways. So, for example, if we think about the vascular network technology, it would be really complex to do a SWOT analysis, okay? Because the sector is not yet created, so there is not a value chain to produce vascular networks, and if there is no value chain, we cannot understand if we have strengths or weaknesses compared to others. However, if we think about a crystalline admixture, about launching to the market a new or a better crystalline admixture, we can already do a SWOT analysis because we know few companies that are already selling crystalline admixture in the market, so we know their value chain. We know if what is the value chain or what is our performance in the different parts of the value chain of our company that will launch a better crystalline admixture, and we can also predict more or less the opportunities and threats because we think the sector is more or less predictable because it has already progressed in the last years and we know more or less what are the market trends. So this would be a classical sector, okay, a better analysis, launching a better crystalline admixture to the market. I would suggest, for example, as an adaptive sector, to provide consultancy to the life cycle assessment in construction. Why? Because as a consultant, it's very difficult to change the whole sector, so the malleability is low, but at the same time, we still don't know what the companies may need, where the companies will appreciate the value. So at this stage, I think you need to be adaptive if you are going to do this business, and you need to adapt to what the client really wants. What is the client really going to appreciate? The fact that you are very specific in the life cycle assessment of self-healing products, or to be more generic doing the life cycle assessment. They may, for example, be interested in paying you a monthly rate to provide a service, or only for punctual services. We don't know. That's what I mean. And in the case, for example, of an example of a visionary strategy would be, for example, to sell concrete with the maintenance included in the price. Why is it visionary? Because it is something totally novel. If you evaluate, if you make your numbers and you demonstrate yourself that it is logic to apply this business model, then you could really change the market, and you need to push in the same direction until you do it. And now I come to the strategies that are more common to your products, which in general, to my view, are the shaping strategy and the visionary strategy, okay? Because normally you are trying to apply a disruptive change to change the construction sector, which is very traditional and is in the maturity or even decline stage of the life cycle. And also because you are developing R&D, so you are in the embryonic part, in the embryonic stage of the life cycle of the product. So you are in shaping and in visionary. This means that you can change the sector. If you can change the sector, normally what is logic is that you try to shape the sector to compete with your strengths, so that your strengths and your knowledge let you compete better in the sector. You don't need to forget that you need to promote a sector where you can compete very comfortable, not that you fight to create certain rules where you cannot compete good. Okay, so for example, an example of this would be to try to create a cluster to boost the incorporation of the life cycle assessment on public lands. Why? Because you are very skilled in a life cycle assessment evaluation, and you know that self-healing products may provide a better or a lower carbon footprint. So knowing this, you try to promote these attitudes and these rules, this way of competing in the sector that favors you. Never forget that, because it's very, very relevant at this stage of your product development. So to summarize what I consider the most relevant ideas that you need to keep in mind, first you need to wonder if you have something worth or unique that you can boost in order to be your competitive advantage in the future, not necessarily in the current market, but in the market that you imagine that could work, okay? Having this potential competitive advantage or developing it is necessary, totally necessary to compete, but may not be enough. Why? Because the sector also needs to be attractive. And this doesn't need to be attractive now. It means the sector that you imagine, the sector that you may help to create, needs to be attractive. Otherwise, you need to change the sector or do another work. There is certain cost of opportunity. Well, later you need to check the relation between your competitive position or your potential competitive position with the attractiveness of the business unit. Okay, this means this is the example of the race where you can run and you can make some, you can earn an award. Okay, you need to consider both the amount of the award and also your capacity to win the race. Here is the same. To continue, point 4, in order to commercialize, you need first to think about identifying the adequate strategy and applying the adequate strategy, the shaping strategy, the classical strategy, the adaptive strategy, or the visionary strategy. It is very relevant that you identify in which of these strategies is more logic to compete in your sector and to try to apply it. And finally, try to be very aware of the IPR barriers, okay? Don't try to compete in a sector and notice later that you couldn't because there was someone had a patent on the product that you are trying to develop. Check also and think also about the concept of the value of death, which means basically the time in the beginning before the launching the market to the product to the market, the time when you have a negative cash flow, okay, where someone has given money to you and you need to give it back. All this time before giving it back, before starting to sell, is the valley of death. It's very relevant that the valley of death is not too deep and is not too long, okay? And this length is the time to reach the market, okay? Very important to be aware of when are you planning to reach the market and how far you postpone or how much delay you have to reach the market, because in the end it is a race. Okay, you cannot be for a very long time with negative cash flow trying to survive. And this is basically the summary of what I think we have commented in the stock. I hope it can be useful for you, or that at least one day you can open it again to try to review some concepts. Thank you very much. Remember that you can always contact me for any question or any debate or any clarification. I hope to see you very soon. Goodbye.